Again, thanks to previous speakers, Minister and Paul, for both fascinating perspectives and different scale of views, I guess, in this rather complicated industry. Excuse me already. I wanted to, I guess, narrow the focus a little bit, and I'm here really to try and look at the role of private sector or industry into coming into the water space and really give a bit of a framework around the issues confronting the industry, but also, what are some of those opportunities that we can really exploit to deliver change. I started, and good because Paul's covered it, so I won't need to dwell on it, but I think when you're talking about the private market, people need to be aware that that's driven very much by problems. Problem is the sexy thing that stimulates market response and innovation. So it's not something we should gloss over. I think this water evolution that we've had in the state has changed quite a lot. 10 years ago, we were very comfortable thinking that we were all sorted and didn't really need anybody's help, and it's becoming more and more obvious that we're all in a bit of a panic. And I think that's a very helpful perspective. Rather than being a negative one, it's a very helpful one going forward. We all know the issues, but we might not all see these graphs. So as Paul said, the problem's now. It's not a future prospect. The future one on that graph there will show you that we're really in trouble if we don't make change, but we certainly have changes to make immediately. Again, just probably echoing comments already made, water's scarce, but we don't really have a sense of that. Most of us don't have a sense of that on a day-to-day basis. And we have had a lot of emphasis on branding, positive branding, that we have a secure water future. It's all necessary, but we're not really actively opening up the market by some of those statements. That cartoon, well, that's happened to us, so I might just say too in the water sector. There's lots of innovation programs. We've put submissions in, and everyone said, oh, that's really good, and they've said exactly the same thing. Can you give us some precedents where this has been done before? And the answer would be, where's the innovation? Transparency and choice. So I think this is an issue that people might not be so aware of, because the customer base in this state is obviously to the Water Corp as the incumbent utility provider, but we've now opened up that market, and Department of Water have driven a lot of those changes in policy to do so, and the Minister released some fantastic, simple messaging on cutting of red tape, but I don't think it's really wandered through all the sectors of the industry, and particularly through to customer base. So a lot of our work is trying to work with clients to do great things at precinct scale levels or even smaller scale levels, and understanding that they don't simply have the information to make choices. They don't have the awareness around who's responsible for what, and it's a very difficult thing to navigate still. So I think we've got a lot of work to do around making very clear opportunities to customers and choice options and different type of market models. There's been a lot of talk about householders, and I think, yes, householders, wonderful piece of, again, work that has been done to get householders on board and aware of necessary changes. But as the Minister said, we have to work harder. Householders have done a lot. There's still bits more to go. Apparently that particular cartoon is just explaining that it took 140 litres of water to make that one cup of coffee. I think we're better than that now, but I think, yeah, getting people to connect as individuals with the bigger issues at hand, be involved more consultatively in big decisions, having the right to want choices, much as we do now in the energy sector. And these are all going to change. Everybody wants this information. We all want, now that we've all done our water efficiency, now we all want the smart grid systems. We all want to have choice around how we change our behaviours. So there's still a lot of improvements, but we certainly need to be able to facilitate them. And of course, if we don't have a recycled water supply widespread, particularly in the urban sector, then some of those choices are very limited. It's a big one, so that's just, yes, regulations are changing. They have changed dramatically since the New Water Act, it's stating more or less the same thing in a way that's not been very well communicated through the full vertical levels of the sector, not clearly understood by a lot of, I guess, engineers and consultants who work in the industry, so therefore not clearly communicated to customers, clients, developers, whoever they may be. And then we've got, I guess, very different things going on across the country because states are still setting legislation. And it's quite difficult when you're a new player in the market to know what are all these legislative opportunities. Are they going to change, or is somebody going to switch things over when the next election comes, which has happened in the irrigation industry in Victoria, for instance. And presence of private providers, so not many people, everyone in this room probably does, but most people outside of this room don't know that there is now a healthy private sector market. We know and have used and still do public and private participation, but this is, I guess, the idea of new emerging utility providers, large-scale problem solvers, different innovation models are not widely appreciated external to this room, I would suggest. But again, it's changing. We won't labour the value and pricing point, it's been said and done, but I will labour the environment point. The environment is the other part of the nexus that I'm strongly interested in. I think that, you know, we have to make choices with the environment requirements in mind. That's another user, if you like, that we need to take into consideration. We've also got legacy issues, so, you know, we've got issues of mining voids that are open, that are going to go salty in 50 years' time. Where's some good ideas for those water resources, and how do they fit in the scheme of things? So, alternatives. This is not sure this is everybody's industry perspective, this is mine. We certainly do need to enable utilities to have a simplified and clearer ability to make money and have a viable business. Either we're not-for-profit or we're for-profit. There's not really a little bit of profit model because it's creating some very big gaps in debt levels and ability to finance. So that's one for the Water Corp. The private sector needs to be incentivised more, and they need to be aware and be provided with real opportunities. So they need to be given real problems, but they also need to be given opportunities to improve efficiencies, not just to pick up the bits that the public sector can't deal with at the minute. I suggest that the future model, and this is something that Paul mentioned, everyone's talking about these words, and this is the model that the EU are looking at. It really is collaboration. It's not either or. It's no good having a big public utility and switching it out for a big private utility. We haven't gained anything there. It's going to be a mix of different scale, different types of, and very much a diversified portfolio of providers, I would call it, not just sources. And as Paul mentioned, this idea that we've become nexus providers. We're not just a water sector, we are the integrated sector that takes into account all these impacts and cross connections and interactions. So what can the private sector bring? Well, there's lots. You might go to the bottom, which is they're here in this room, so perhaps have conversations with them. But there's a very different and very wide-ranging set of abilities, skills, experiences in the private sector that all have a role at all sorts of scales in this particular water issue that we're talking about. I won't go through them all, but I think key things are, you know, commercial sectors, private sector is far more willing to be transparent. It's very important for reputation when you're a private business to basically, you know, be very open with your reporting, and that is essential to your reputation, competitive edge. Obviously, deeper pockets, so some of the larger ones, not mine, is certainly able to come in at financing and helping to get us through this rather widening gap in debt levels until we reach the next sustainable plateau, hopefully. So I'm just going to go through some models. There's thousands, that private sector can provide some opportunities to. Model 1 is just simply, thank you, improving what we do with within the existing structures of public utility providers. So obviously business as usual, it's correct to say that private industry is already involved in the water industry. A lot of them are by alliance contracting arrangements, growing number of PPP arrangements, a growing and quite recent, as the Minister talked about, innovation partnerships, and Paul talked to. The next one I've called shedding is one that I think has huge opportunities, and those two images are projects, one in Victoria, one in Tasmania, where they're just, again, cash-strapped small communities. It doesn't fit big business models for the water authorities, so they're just alternative ways of dealing with wastewater and water reuse. And the top one is basically using the treated wastewater through a constructed wetland for a small town of about 500 people at Lake Bolac in Victoria, and then using that water to reinstate an endangered floodplain community, which is going successfully. The bottom one is basically an interjunal wetland recreation project, but it's actually the wastewater treatment plant for King Island, Curry. So there's different scales, different interesting opportunities, and procurement. So I'll flick through. Obviously, service provider for non-serviced areas, one where the private sector has been involved in, and that's still a model that we can do a lot more with. So if it's a scale that doesn't suit the big public utilities, the private sector is willing and able. Model 3 would be decentralised. So decentralised utility provisions at smaller scales, whether they're precinct level or district scale, infill projects or augmenting central schemes, are very, very real opportunities and can make some very big difference to how we're delivering water and how to kind of work with places like Perth, which is quite difficult to upgrade infrastructure to provide for future growth. And 4 is the bulk model, wastewater treatment and reuse and bulk recycled water. So, you know, why wouldn't a private provider buy wastewater instead of water, treat it and perhaps move that back into the agricultural industrial sector? So I'll be very quick. There's lots of these things. There's changes needed to the way we run our public utility business models. We need a new, what I've called sustainable business as usual. We need a business as usual, but it can't be the one we've got now because it actually doesn't even exist anymore. It's in great transition. So what are we comparing when we're making choices on innovation and alternatives? The infrastructure sharing arrangements have to be broadly assessed against a bigger range of KPIs than just foregone revenue when we're trying to look at third-party relationships. Private sector participation, we need to, again, as we've said, let customers know that there is a choice, let them know what those choices are, help facilitate the myriad of things one needs to do. So I've called a sustainable water broker role something, say, that we would do in the industry just to help people to navigate through this transition. We're not going to have very clear pathways immediately, but we need to immediately be delivering projects on the ground. Regulations and pricing. So yes, we do need a legislation that raises the bar, and it's the biggest driver for change that's known globally, and we've got it very well in terms of level of service, water quality, volumes, minimum flows. But we probably don't have it in terms of the specific statements around water reuse. We have them in policy. They're encouraged, but I can tell you not many people are driving them in the industry just yet. So I've suggested maybe we do need to be slightly more, I guess, bullish in terms of some of these things that we know we need to do to make change, like restricting non-potable uses, phasing in change, incentivising pricing, incentivising or disincentivising, that should have said, discharge disposal, so we don't do it. Stormwater world is in that space already, and standardisation. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.